Nearly most of our dysfunctions in this world are protective. When you get to the heart of the matter, why am I like this? It's just a dysfunctional protection. Maybe it was functional at one point, or maybe it was the only choice you had at that point, but it no longer serves you as a form of protection. So you have to drop it, you have to let it go.
You have found the Thinking Mind podcast.
Welcome back to the Thinking Mind podcast. Today it's Alex and we're in conversation with Daniel Fryer. Daniel Fryer is a psychotherapist, hypnotherapist and author. He's the author of the book, The 4 Thoughts That Will Fuck You Up. We all know on some level that a lot of what makes us unhappy isn't just what happens to us, our external circumstances, but our mind's interpretation of what happens to us. And we all know that our mind can get in our way. In The 4 Thoughts That Fuck You Up, Daniel goes into detail about Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy and describes 4 distinct categories of thoughts which are holding us back and sabotaging us, and then goes on to describe 4 alternative thoughts that we can have, and then also goes into a 6-week plan and how to put all of this in action. So on today's podcast, we talk in depth about his book, but also Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy, hypnotherapy, psychedelics, and many other topics. This is the Thinking Mind podcast. There are many ways you can support it. You can follow on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Share it with a friend, give us a rating, or if you want to support us further, you can check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. Thanks for listening. Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm with Daniel Fryer. Daniel, thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me.
You practice as a psychotherapist, and a question I like to ask psychotherapists, because they normally have a different answer every time, is what does practicing psychotherapy mean to you?
I always like to think of it as if we were living in age-old times, like hunter-gatherer societies or small villages, I'm probably the strange hermity one in the last house in the village or the last tent. They're helping maintain the psycho-spiritual well-being of his local community. So you have a problem, you come to me, I talk, I help you understand the problem and effect a solution. That's got pedigree going back thousands of years.
And I think that's I share that sentiment that there seems to be a gap in our society for how do we face these problems that people are facing. And because there is a decline in religiosity in our societies, because we're seeing a degradation of these institutions, a lot of people, they don't know where to go. A psychotherapy, I think, is one place they go. And then they go to a number of other places as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we've done a lot of work in destigmatizing mental health so that nobody feels so bad approaching a therapist anymore. And I mean, I use the word therapist and coach interchangeably, and I provide the therapy that I provide, our EBT, is useful as both therapy and coaching. But there is a decline in religiosity, but there's also people are turning more to spiritual practices once more. There was an article in The Economist, it was either earlier this year or late last year, where it said that shamanism was the fastest growing religion in this country. But that was a little bit incorrect, because shamanism isn't a religion, it's a form of psycho-spiritual healing. The actual fastest growing official religion in this country is Druidry, but even that's not really a religion. That's also a form of nature-based healing. So people are turning to therapy because we destigmatized it, but they're also returning to kind of spiritual practices as a way of enhancing their well-being as well. And I think that's quite important. Psychotherapy sometimes is a little bit like medicine. We treat the mind, but not the body. We forget that it's the both at the same time, and there is, as well as mind and body, the mind and the body has a psycho-spiritual element. It's not all about symptomology.
So do you worry that with psychotherapy, as with some aspects of psychiatry, that we're putting words around people's problems like anxiety or depression, for instance, that obviously can be helpful, but at the same time, it diminishes the problem. It somehow dilutes the nature of the problem. I'm talking about, for example, when people might be facing really important issues in their life, maybe spiritual issues, maybe existential issues. And we try and, almost to make everyone feel calmer, to make us feel calmer, to make them feel calmer. We say, okay, you have an anxiety disorder. It neatly captures the problem, but might be missing out a lot of important things at the same time.
Absolutely. There's that's not an easy thing to answer. I'll try to be as succinct as I can. First of all, things became too pathologized. All our diagnoses really come from diagnostic manuals. There's the DSM and there's the ICD, which is the International Classification of Diseases, and they initially started out as just reference manuals for psychiatrists. So there was areas of commonality. But then insurance companies got in on the act as well because it helped them to understand. But between the insurance and the psychiatry, they became Bibles, they became de facto. And I think sometimes that we forget that they're guidelines, they're references, they're not the thing itself. And some therapies say it's all anxiety, so it's all bad, and we will just try and reduce those symptoms as much as possible. Or it's all depression and it's all bad, and we will try and reduce your symptoms as much as possible. But some therapies actually recognize the legitimacy of our emotions. It recognizes that there are challenges and it recognizes that there are adversities. And so in the face of that challenge or adversity, there is a healthy way of expressing that emotion and an unhealthy way of expressing that emotion. And so with that kind of method in mind, you would seek to address what somebody is telling themselves so that they can express that emotion constructively rather than not constructively. And, enable a change, maybe bring a little bit more hope into the room, but just also acknowledge the validity of those feelings.
Yeah. So is that where rational emotive behavior therapy comes in for you as a kind of therapy that can help people to acknowledge their challenges and see the difference between healthier or less healthy expressions of emotion?
Absolutely. So REBT is one of those therapies that does that. It was, in fact, I think it's possibly the first to say, hang on a minute, your emotions are actually valid. And for every single unhealthy emotion, there is a healthy, rational equivalent. And again, it recognizes there is an adversity. REBT has this thing, it's called the ABCDE model of psychological health, and A stands for adversity. B stands for your beliefs or your thought processes about that adversity, and C stands for the consequence. That's where the emotions sit. So anxiety is a consequence, depression is a consequence, anger management is a consequence. And we would dispute those beliefs. That's what the D stands for, hopefully leading to an effective rational outlook. The effective rational outlook means there's still an adversity. However, the way you think and the way you feel and the way you act in the face of that adversity has changed for the better for you.
Yeah, because ultimately a huge amount of our psychological well-being is not about what happens to us, but our ability to elegantly or less elegantly deal with or react to the things that happen to us.
Yeah, ultimately it's about resilience. They're dealing with things elegantly or less elegantly. Life's full of challenges, it always has been. The challenges change, they may increase, but they will always be.
This is the kind of wisdom you see in Stoicism, for example. It's been around for thousands of years. You can see something similar in Buddhism as well. But would you agree that we still have a culture that's very much based on being happy equates to accumulating certain things, and that's the path to happiness, is to get money, to get success in dating, to get career success? That's the way you get happy, and it feels like that's the blueprint that's shot out to us every day.
It is, and that's a factor in why mental health issues are going up, not down.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to change that concept. You're absolutely right. REBT is based on Stoicism in part and also Buddhism in part. And we do need to lose that attachment to material achievements. So REBT makes a distinction between what we call self-worth and self-esteem. Self-esteem is where you attach value to your achievements. So if you achieve something, your value as a person goes up. Your self-esteem is increased. If you fail at something, your value as a person goes down, your self-esteem decreases. And so your value as a person and your mood is attached to the achievements or lack thereof, because that's how we're taught. Self-worth is about accepting yourself unconditionally. So you are absolutely fine as you are. You do not have to achieve a single thing in this world to become a more worthwhile person. And failing at things doesn't make you a less worthwhile person. You are worthwhile in and of yourself as you are. And this means that when you achieve things, your mood lifts. Yeah, I feel better. And when you fail to achieve things, when you make mistakes, your mood dips. But as your mood goes up and down, your sense of self remains more stable because you're accepting yourself as you are, worthwhile and fallible. Fallible means you make mistakes. Fallible means you have flaws. But I don't just advocate REBT. I'm also a big fan of positive psychology. And positive psychology, again, just removes that whole notion of you have to achieve things in this world to be happy. In fact, positive psychology is the study of human happiness, about what makes you tick and what makes your life worthwhile. And, studies are very, very clear on the matter. It's not achieving things that makes you happy. In fact, achieving something is quite disappointing because you work towards it, you achieve it, yay, and then there's this sudden drop because you think, oh, heck, what now?
Yeah. I mean, achieving things gives you that temporary dopamine rush as you approach the achievement. And then once you actually have the achievement, you get the fall of dopamine, as he describes.
Absolutely. And I mean, human beings are goal directed. Don't get me wrong. And if we don't have goals, if we don't have a direction, our mood will suffer. We'll fall by the wayside. We are more prone to depression, to anxiety. So it is good to have goals. But it's not the achievement of the goal that's the point. It's actually the journey on the way that provides the reward. It's what happens on that journey, the people that you meet, the side tracks and side roads that you go down as part of that journey. And if you can keep your focus on that, that's how you can maintain your happiness, because all you need to do is keep realigning with new goals, heading yourself in new directions.
So that's what is that the main takeaway from positive psychology, that it's about setting goals carefully so that you choose goals which are perpetual, that never ends, that keeps you on that journey, focusing on the journey as your source of happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, our life changes all the time. I mean, I do a lot of work with people who have just retired, and then they get really depressed, they get really anxious because they don't know what to do next. And you're like, all they need is help setting a new goal in line with their new position in life. It doesn't have to be about work anymore. It can be something else. But really, I mean, if you look at Buddhism and Stoicism, really, they're clear. The meaning of life, really, is just to find your joy. What makes you happy? And then do that. What gets in the way of that is this materialistic society based on achievement.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote a book, which I really enjoyed reading, The 4 Thoughts That Fuck You Up. And incidentally, this episode is a shout out to my friend Alan, who recommended the book. Thanks for the recommendation.
Thank you, Alan.
How did you, what was your motivation for writing this book? And then how did you arrive at these 4 thoughts?
I didn't. So the book is all about REBT. So REBT was developed in the mid-50s by a guy called Albert Ellis, sadly deceased, a genius and an unsung hero, really, of psychotherapy. In a professional list a few decades ago now, he was considered one of the most influential psychotherapists in history. In fact, he beat Freud in the poll. The only person above him was Carl Rogers, who's the father of humanistic, person-centered therapy. He was at number 1. Albert Ellis was number 2. Freud coming at number 3 as influential figures in the field. but nobody's really heard of him, and REBT itself flies under the radar. And REBT says there are 4 main beliefs or attitudes, types of thought that disturb you. And in the face of any given adversity, in the face of any given problem, your disturbance, whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression, whether it be something else, will be a result of a combination of those 4 attitudes. For instance, let's say I've got an exam coming up, and it's important to me. If I'm telling myself, I absolutely must pass that exam. It's going to be awful if I don't pass that exam. It's going to be unbearable if I can't pass that exam. And if I don't pass that exam, it's all my fault. I'm a loser. How am I going to feel about that exam?
It's going to be tricky.
It's going to be tricky. I'm going to be stressed. I'm going to be anxious. What's my sleep going to be like?
Not good.
Not good. What's my revision going to be like?
It's going to be hampered by anxiety.
Hampered by anxiety and poor sleep. So I'm going to arrive on the day anxious, stressed, sleep deprived, and poorly revised. It's not going to go well. Well, there are 4 thoughts in that statement. There was a demand, I must pass the exam. There was a thing called awfulizing or catastrophizing. It would be awful if I didn't pass it. There's another one called low frustration tolerance. I couldn't stand it if I didn't pass it. And then finally, there was a value of myself. I am a failure. I am a loser if I don't. They're the 4 thoughts: a demand, awfulization, low frustration tolerance, and a put down. They are the 4 thoughts, according to Albert Ellis, that I say, fuck you up. Each one of those beliefs has a healthy, rational, constructive equivalent. So let's say I've got exactly the same exam. It's still important to me, but this is my attitude. Yes, I'd like to pass it. That's my preference, but I know I don't have to. It doesn't always happen. I won't like it if I don't, but it's not the end of the world. I might find it difficult to deal with, but I'll get through it. And I'm not a loser. I'm not a failure. Even if I don't pass, I'm a worthwhile, fallible human being. If I thought like that, how would I feel about the exam?
Everything would feel a lot easier.
Easier. I'm still going to be nervous, maybe even nervously excited, but everything's going to be a lot easier. So what will my sleep be like?
It'll be better.
Better. What will my revision be like?
Probably a lot more effective, because when you're calm, revision is more effective.
Exactly. So I'm going to arrive on the day calmer, better, rested, and my revision has gone well. It's constructive. So I'm going to do better on the day. So REBT is the art of taking somebody who thinks along the dysfunctional lines, the must, the awful, the can't stand it, the put down, and helps deconstruct that attitude system and reinforce the healthier, rational version. I'd like to, but I don't have to. It's bad, but it's not awful. It's difficult. I'll deal with it. Not a failure. I'm a worthwhile, fallible human being.
I feel like, the first thing I want to say is I really like this paradigm, because it highlights that it's your thoughts fucking you up as opposed to the situation. So we're normally focused on the situation, like the circumstance is my enemy.
Yeah.
Whereas what we're saying here is we're introducing a new entity, which is your mind and your mind's tendency to get in its own way, essentially. So I really like that aspect of it. Do you think, in my experience, most of us have these kinds of thoughts most of the time? Is that your experience as well? Have you found any naturally wise people who don't have this as the factory settings?
We all have them. Even the wisest of us have our moments. So REBT says that, we all have preferences for things. Preferences for how we like to be, where we like to be, how we like to be treated, where we like to be at any given station in our life, and preferences for where we like to eat, preferences for what we consider our social circle. And as long as we stick to our preferences, we are reasonable, we are rational, we are constructive. Even if our preference isn't being met, we are reasonable, we are rational, we are constructive. Unfortunately, it's just a biological human tendency. The stronger the preference, the more important it is to us, the more likely, unconsciously, we're going to turn it into a demand. The minute it becomes a demand, it becomes irrational, it becomes dogmatic, it becomes non-constructive. And so the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act isn't helpful. That applies to all of us, even the wisest.
And it just takes a lot of mental effort to adopt this more mature way of looking at things. When I think about the four thoughts, it makes me think that maybe our brains are very predisposed to thinking about things very much in the short term and in acute settings, and hyper emphasizing the importance of any given situation. Like, I think, I imagine a 16-year-old boy, for example, going on his first date ever. Like, to him, that's the most important event, one of the most important events of his life at the time, and he's probably having demands about it. He's probably feeling like it could go amazingly or it could go awful. He might be thinking he can't cope, etc. Now imagine that man as a 50-year-old, several decades later, reflecting on that event. He's then thinking it wasn't such a big deal at all. And automatically, just because of, by virtue of the passage of time, he can now take this more mature position. So it feels like it's just a difference. It's a kind of a difference in perspective almost, and just a tendency to attach way too much gravity to whatever event or situation happens to be right in front of us, and that lack of ability to take the bigger perspective.
Absolutely. It's okay to have gravity. It's okay to have things that are important, even super important. But when you demand that they must or must not be, it becomes the be all and end all. It becomes all encompassing, and you lose that perspective. When you bring the preference back into the room, that thing might still have gravity or weight. It will still carry the same level of importance to you, but it doesn't become the be all and end all. You remain with that sense of perspective, or you bring it back in the room if you've lost it.
How do you, when you're working with people clinically, how do you help them move from the first position to the second position, from the four thoughts that are fucking them up to the more mature position?
Well, I mean, everybody's different. I mean, there is a formula, but you can't be formulaic because everybody's different. But they come in, they talk about their problem or problems, and you come up with a problem list. And doesn't matter whether there's one or two problems on that list or 10 or 15 problems on that list. You would pick a priority problem and then work on it according to that ABCDE model. So you would find out what their beliefs were in the face of that specific adversity, and you would weaken and dispute those unhealthy beliefs, strengthened by disputing those healthy beliefs again and again and again through a process until they've achieved that effective rational outlook. You can then work on the next problem in a similar fashion, and the next and the next. But one of the nice things about REBT is that not only is it psychotherapy, not only is it a coaching methodology, it's also considered to be a school of thought in its own right. So if you adopt those principles in your life in general becomes calmer and more rational. And so when you're working with an individual, you're hoping for a tipping point where they stop applying it to just their specific problems on that list, and then there's a penny drop moment and they just apply it to the whole thing.
Do you find that typically people are particularly faced with one particular thought that tends to be dominant in their situation, or does it tend to be a combination more often than not?
It can be one, it can be the other. So there's four. So a dogmatic demand, we don't like words such as must and mustn't, should and shouldn't, and got to and have to. REBT says that's always there. Always look for the demand, says REBT. And a demand is the rigid expression of a desire for something. So in that exam analogy, it was the rigid expression of the desire to pass. REBT says there's always a demand. And then you may or may not authorize that demand. You may or may not be exhibiting low frustration tolerance in the face of that demand. You may or may not be putting yourself or somebody else down in the face of that demand. And that's in the face of that specific problem. But some people recognize their own themes, so that they will recognize that they are very demanding in a number of areas, or they recognize that they tend to catastrophize many, if not all, of the events in their lives, or they tend to recognize that low frustration tolerance is a key theme for them, or they recognize that putting themselves down or other people down automatically is a key thing. So if they recognize that, you can broaden it out immediately. Okay, well, you authorize this problem, but where else are you authorizing? And where else would it help you to adopt that anti-authorizing attitude? So awful becomes bad, but not the end of the world. And so you go specific, but you broaden out.
I found the chapter about putting yourself and other people down particularly pertinent and moving, and I also think it's really helpful for people to be able to draw that connection between putting themselves down and other people down and putting down the world. I don't think people generally connect those, but it's really helpful for people to recognize, firstly, that putting other people or the world down is doing them more harm than anyone else. That it's kind of a toxic mental habit, and also that it tends to be linked to the self-criticism. If you feel very critical of yourself, you're much more likely to put down external events or to put down other people.
Yeah. So that put down, that has three main areas. So there is self-damning. I'm putting myself down. So I don't get what I want, therefore I am rubbish, I am a failure. Or it's the other person, you're stupid, you're an idiot. By world damning, we actually mean things. I mean, yes, you can put the world down, you can say it's completely horrible, but we also mean things. So I could make a mistake in this podcast and walk away going, well, that was it. That podcast was completely rubbish. I could make a mistake at work, or things could not be going well at work, and I would decide that my whole job is completely rubbish. It's like a global negative statement about yourself, I'm a failure, others, you're an idiot, or things, that thing is rubbish. And it tends to, I mean, if it's self-damning, it's self-criticism, and you're going to be unhappy. If it's other damning, it's criticizing others, and you're going to be unhappy. And if it's the thing, you're still going to be unhappy.
Mm-hmm. If someone tends to chronically put themselves down, and of course, shame is a feature of this, and shame is a very specific emotion, and an emotion that I think people are rarely ever conscious of when they're experiencing it, and yet it's so debilitating. Are there any specific interventions that you use to garner that unconditional self-acceptance?
Absolutely. Disputing is a key factor in our EBT. Disputing are various exercises that challenge your beliefs over and over again in a variety of ways. So let's say I'm a failure if I don't pass my exam. Well, you challenge that immediately. You can't be a failure. Even if you fail that exam, you can't be a failure, because you can evidence other successes in your life. You will have achieved in other areas of your life. You will have good points, strong points, exams under your belt from previous institutions. Your life is full of achievements, so you cannot be a failure. When you say I am a failure, it's a blanket term, but you can disprove it with all your achievements and successes. It doesn't make sense to say you're a failure just because you failed at something. You can fail at something, that's one thing, that's one aspect, but it doesn't make any sense to broaden it out and define all of you in your entirety by that one aspect. And it doesn't help you to do that either. It's not the language of confidence. You're right, it's the language of shame or anxiety or depression or whatever the mood problem is based on that belief system. So you will be creating that mood by that statement that isn't true, isn't logical, isn't helpful. The alternative, meanwhile, is everything that belief wasn't. So I'm not a failure. Even if I fail at this exam, I'm a worthwhile, fallible human being. Well, you can prove that you're not a failure. You've got successes. You can prove that you're worthwhile. Everybody is. It's an innate human condition. We're all born, we all live, we all die as we do the living bit. We're just making it up as we go along. We're doing the best we can. We're all the same. Worthwhile really means you're sufficient as you are. But you are also fallible. And if you fail that exam, that's evidence of one of your fallibilities. So you can prove the whole statement true, valid, not a failure. Here are my successes, worthwhile as I am, and I'm fallible. And if I fail, that's proof of my fallibility. And that is the only sensible way of looking at anybody. It's the only logical way of looking at anybody. You can rate individual aspects of yourself. Good at that, rubbish at that, succeeded here, failed there, like that about myself, don't like that about myself. But the only way to look at the whole picture is the stepping back and going, that's me in its entirety, worthwhile and fallible. And again, if you adopt that, it means your sense of self stays the same. So you can get things wrong, but you accept yourself. You don't have to like it, and you won't, but it doesn't mean that you have to attach anxiety to it or shame to it. You can have a much more healthy negative emotion. So you might be worried or remorseful.
And I can imagine those kinds of, I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in those interventions, especially because I think, for example, embracing that we are worthwhile, again, that's something you see on Instagram quite a lot, isn't it? Embrace that you're worthwhile. But also what people are more reluctant to do perhaps is to embrace their fallibility. And there's something, even as I hear that, there's something very refreshing about the idea of embracing, not trying to minimize the fact that you have flaws, but just embracing the fact that you have flaws and you've gotten some things wrong in the past and you're going to get some things wrong in the future, and that's okay, is amazingly refreshing. However, like those interventions, I can imagine them working amazingly well. They're very rational and they work really well at a cognitive level. I can imagine them going on to affect someone's emotional state. But do you find that some people require a kind of intervention that works more at a purely emotional or somatic level? Because I work with a lot of people where more rationalistic interventions, there's a limit. It kind of works and they kind of are able to change their beliefs, and yet there's something deeper that isn't being moved by that kind of intervention.
Yeah, so REBT does go deeper. So there's like the Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy. The emotive bit's really important. People think that we're trying to churn out rational people, robots, so that you're supposed to go through life going, that's completely logical. I do not have an emotional reaction to that. No, we want you to emote. Emote, please emote, but emote in a healthy way, in a rational way. And disputing when you say, well, is it true? Does it make sense? Does it help me? That is by its very nature a very rational exercise. It's very robotic. It's very Vulcan. But then we go deeper and we go emotional. And we go, okay, well, now we've disproved your unhealthy beliefs. Let's look at what they get you. Let's explore your life. How do they make you think? How do they make you feel? How do they make you behave? What do they stop you from doing that you would like to do? What do they make you do that you don't like doing? Who else are they affecting? Let's explore you. It's very challenging and it's very visceral. And people write these answers down. They're painting a picture and it's an unpleasant one, but they can't escape it. It's there. It's in black and white. So there is that visceral reaction. And then you build another picture. Well, let's look at the healthy beliefs. They are true. They are sensible. They are helpful. If you embraced them, what would they get you? What would change? What would be different? How would you be thinking? How would you be feeling? How would you be feeling? What would they get you to do that would be different? And it's a very somatic experience. It has a feeling attached to it. There's a shift attached to it. And people report it. They come back and they go, something has changed. I can't quite put my finger on it, say some of them, or it's been revelatory, say others, but there is a sensory shift. But I'm also a clinical hypnotherapist. And so you can bring hypnotherapy into your rational emotive behavior practice as well. And you can help people make shifts emotionally and somatically by using that as a tool. But when you use hypnotherapy and REBT, you're using it in the service of its ethos. So it's all still about undermining those unhealthy beliefs and reinforcing those healthy beliefs. But yeah, you can use any tool from the hypnotherapy toolbox to do so.
So it feels like, because I've actually spoken with Dr. David Spiegel, who is an expert on hypnotherapy. From my understanding, it's like, at least in the way that you're talking about it here, hypnotherapy is like the vehicle that you can use to help people internalize a lot of the frameworks and the beliefs from REBT. Is that a reasonable way of putting it?
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the things that you can do with it. But yes, it's a very succinct thing that you can do with it. So obviously, hypnotherapy is working with the power of the unconscious. But if you think about it, those beliefs that we're working on, the unhealthy ones are unconscious. They're automatic. They're default. The healthy ones aren't yet. But also the consequences that the C in that ABCDE model, so your anxiety and all the thoughts and behaviors attached to it, that's also unconscious. It's pretty automatic by the time you come to therapy.
We've spent a long time practicing our dysfunctional beliefs and thoughts and behaviors.
Yes. So hypnosis works at that level as well. It can help break apart the unhealthy, imprint the healthy.
Maybe we should go back a little. What is hypnosis, and how do you hypnotize someone?
Well, hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness. First and foremost, it's an altered state of consciousness. It's a trance-like state. And it's not weird. It's not unusual. As human beings, we are drifting in and out of these trance-like states umpteen times a day. When you are nodding off at night, you don't immediately fall asleep. You drift into sleep. That's a hypnotic trance. When you wake up in the morning, even if it feels like you've just opened your eyes and woken up, you haven't. There's a stage as you come out of sleep and into waking. That's hypnosis. Having a nap during the day is trance. Zoning out of anything is trance. Daydreaming is trance. Anything where you focus also becomes trance. So if you like reading and you lose yourself in that book, you are in a trance. If you love movies and you lose yourself in that movie, you are in a trance. If you drive, we've all had the experience after we've been driving for a while. You will get in the car at point A, you will get out of the car at point B, and then you will go, "Ooh, I don't really remember that journey." And then you'll worry that you've been a really dangerous driver when you haven't. You've actually been in a driving trance. And actually, because you're in an unconscious driving trance, your response times are better than if you were concentrating. So if you put the daydreaming and the nodding and the napping and the books and the movies and the cars and you all together, as human beings, we are drifting into trance a lot. Therapeutically speaking, and hypnotherapy is just a therapy conducted in that state of trance. Different therapies for different things, depending on what you want to achieve. Maybe it's therapy for weight control, pain control, stopping smoking, anxiety, depression. Therapy is conducted in that trance. Your mind is more suggestible in trance. Your deep-seated feelings and unhealthy beliefs are more accessible in trance. Your conscious mind likes to block. It likes to protect you as much as it can. All this, we're not going there.
Why is that? Why is our conscious mind trying to? What's it trying to do? What's it trying to protect us from?
Ourselves, our fears. Nearly most of our dysfunctions in this world are protective. When you get to the heart of the matter, why am I like this? It's just a dysfunctional protection. Maybe it was functional at one point, or maybe it was the only choice you had at that point, but it no longer serves you as a form of protection. So you have to drop it. You have to let it go.
Right. So like anxiety is essentially, I don't want to die.
Well, absolutely right. So anxiety is about threat. It's about danger. But it only needs to be applied to things that are life-threatening. So let's say that you are listening to the radio and you hear that a tiger has escaped from the local zoo and it hasn't been fed, so there's a big hungry tiger on the loose, and you think, okay, that's a bit worrying. But then you leave your house, you walk down the road, and that tiger leaps out in front of you. blood-curdling fear is the only thing that you need in the face of that situation, because that fear will either make you run for your life, fight for your life, or root to the spot, rigid with fear. And with a tiger probably rooted to spot is the best form of protection that you've got. There is a life-threatening danger, you need that anxiety. But if it's not life-threatening, you don't need that fight or flight response. So, if there's a traffic jam, or there's a poor exam result, or there's a review at work, it's worrying, it's a concern, it's a pressure. It isn't life-threatening, so you don't need the same responses. But because of our unhealthy beliefs, we're triggering that unhealthy, life-threatening, oh my God, I'm going to die response.
And I guess we're just getting that response all the time. And sometimes our fears are really abstract. Like, it might be a fear that we're going to die, or a fear that we're going to lose status. But sometimes it's even a fear that we're going to learn something new about ourselves that we don't like, or we're going to learn that the story that we've told to ourselves is wrong about ourselves. So it's even non-specific, deep-rooted fear of change or distortion, that things are going to be somehow different in a way that we can't manage. And that's, I guess, what you're hinting at, that's what our conscious mind is trying to protect us from.
I think you've hit on what most people actually come with, which is a fear of change, or a fear of adopting a new story. Well, that the story they have been selling themselves their whole life has been wrong.
Yeah, I used to work in an addiction clinic. I worked in an addiction clinic for a year, and something that a lot of the clinicians there told me when I started was, just be careful that when people enter treatment and recover from their addictions, start to recover from their addiction, one of the big things they start to face is depression in the face of regret of all the time that they spent, sometimes decades, spent addicted to a particular substance. So even recovery in some circumstances can be very dangerous psychologically.
Absolutely. Sometimes that's like the final hurdle, is that realization of just how much it's got in the way. And so what you have to help people at that point understand is your new life begins now. Thank God it's now and not next year or another 5 years or too late you died. And by all means be a bit regretful that it wasn't sooner, but also accept yourself as you are, worthwhile and fallible, and it was now, not sooner.
So we went on a bit of a tangent there about how our conscious mind is protecting us, but continue along the lines of hypnosis. So hypnosis is helping us break through these conscious dysfunctional protections. And then what happens next?
I like to work in a very goal-directed way, whether it's hypnotherapy, whether it's REBT. This is where you are. This is where you want to be. Let's look at how we're going to get you there and what will it look like for you when you are there. And you just give people whatever they need to help them on that journey, a tool, a resource, a new way of thinking, a belief statement. And all hypnotherapy does really is just reinforce that really rather beautifully. I compare it like this. Let's say that I've got very negative self-talk. Let's say it's very easy to spot negative self-talk. So you pay me a compliment and I go, oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. No. You have a nice smile, you say. No, I don't. That's very negative self-talk. Healthy self-talk, you pay me a compliment, you've got a nice smile. I'd say, well, thank you. Well, in hypnotherapy, you would just take that person and go, you do have a nice smile. You do. You have lots of lovely qualities, including this and this and that. And you do have a very nice smile. And because it's working that unconscious level and it has sidestepped your conscious mind for a little while, when you come out of hypnosis, that means the next time that somebody pays you a compliment, you may automatically go, no, but then there's another little thought below that goes, actually, no, yes, I am. And so you will also say thank you and smile and feel happy. And after a while, that new process becomes automatic for you.
How many sessions of hypnotherapy do you find is typical that someone can typically need to meaningfully change their psychology around a particular situation?
That's always is, you know, it's a how long is a piece of string question. REBT is better at answering that one. It's REBT says if you have one specific problem, say anxiety about exams, we are reasonably confident that we can get you at that effective rational outlook position in about 6 sessions, as long as every single session goes according to plan. But people will often surprise you, and they will come in after 2 sessions and go, I've got it. I don't think I need you anymore. Or they don't get it, and 6 sessions becomes 10. Hypnotherapy can do amazing things, and it can take somebody with a lifelong anxiety, and they come back on session 2 and go, I don't know what you did to me in the last session, but I'm great. Thank you. And off they go. Other people, they just want layers and layers and layers and layers, so it becomes a lot longer.
And I guess with hypnotherapy, it's important for people to be aware that some people are much more hypnotizable than other people, and some people aren't hypnotizable at all. Is that right?
Well, yes. So a big rule of thumb, 90% of all human beings are hypnotizable to some degree or other. 90. In the 10% who aren't or can't, first and foremost, we put people who think that hypnosis is a load of old rubbish, or dangerous, or weird, and they do not want to be under any circumstances hypnotized. Absolutely fine. My job's not to fight you. If you don't think you can, you can't. You're right. Bye-bye. We also put very, very young children in there because their brains are still forming, and you really don't want to be fiddling around with that. So it's not that they can't, it's that we don't want to. It's not ethical. But also we put people, so addictions. At the beginning of your journey into therapy, if you're a hardcore addict of somebody, so if you're like 2 or 3 grams of coke a day every day, if you're like several bottles of whiskey and a 10-day blackout level of addiction, hypnotherapy will not work for you at that point. Your brain is still too fried. Once you have got clean and sober for a period of time, then we can bring it into the room. But at that point, we can't hypnotize you. Your brain is already elsewhere. And it's the same with people who are heavily medicated for their mental health issues. You might not be able to get through the medication. Also, if they've got a psychosis, it's not that you can't use hypnotherapy, but hypnotherapy is a little dangerous because they've already lost touch with reality. So you have to use it. You decide not to use it at all, or use it very, very carefully, very, very sparingly.
How do you hypnotize someone?
First of all, you just want to help them relax. I have a little bugbear. Before I was a therapist, I was a journalist, and so I'm very clued into the features and news and things. And my entire career, nearly every single person that's ever written an article or a blog or a feature about hypnotherapy has said, you will be forgiven for thinking that hypnosis is all about mad staring eyes and swinging pocket watches. And it's not. But by saying that, you're reinforcing the stereotype that it is. And for 20 years, nearly every single, but 95% of articles start off with something like that. It's not about swinging pocket watches. It's not about mad staring eyes, except it can be. They used to, hundreds of years ago, use a swinging thing. There was a surgeon called James Braid who pioneered hypnotherapy for surgery, and he realized that you could help somebody to tire out by swinging something rhythmically in front of them. It could be a pendulum, it could be a pocket watch, it could be your finger. What you're actually doing is tiring somebody's eyes. And tired eyes want to close. And the minute you close your eyes, you can't help it. You begin to relax. Well, once somebody is beginning to relax, you can take that relaxation down, you deepen it. So the first stage is called an induction. You just want somebody to close their eyes. The mad staring eyes bit, that belongs to Mesmer, who was the father of what we call mesmerism, which is hypnotic-like. But he was very theatrical. He gave you a performance. He thought that he could command you with his voice, with his eyes. And, that was discredited hundreds of years ago as well. But you can stare at somebody. If somebody really is having trouble going into a trance, you can stare at them until they get so uncomfortable they close their eyes. They close their eyes, they begin to relax. Once they're relaxed, you deepen the trance with various methods. So you're just helping them drift down into a deeper level of relaxation. or not. It depends on the therapy. For some therapies, you don't want a very deep level of trance, and for some you do. So you deepen the trance to an appropriate level for the therapy. If it's really, really deep, you're spending a lot of time getting into that deep, deep level. However, what you experience is no indication of depth of trance anyway. People think that to be deeply entranced, you're going to be completely unaware. And that's not the case. You can be in a really, really deep trance, yet hear every single word I'm saying. Most people do drift in and out of conscious awareness. They do remember bits and pieces, but not the whole thing. Some people do actually just switch off. They kind of remember what I was saying at the beginning. The next thing they know, that I'm asking them to wake up, and the therapy bit in the middle is a complete blank to them. But that's all good. It's your conscious mind that does the listening or the not listening. And we don't work with the conscious, we work with the unconscious, and that will remember everything that's been said to it. But saying I don't remember doesn't mean you were in a deep trance. It just means that your conscious mind drifted off somewhere else for the period that we were in trance.
Can you give me some examples of, let's say you're working with someone who is trying to lose weight and they're using hypnotherapy. This makes sense to me because eating is such a deeply rooted behavior that it makes sense to be working at the level of the unconscious. We often eat unconsciously. What kind of messages would you be suggesting around that particular issue?
It depends. So I work with healthy eating and unhealthy eating. More at the habit level. So quite a lot of our eating problems are just habits that have got a little out of control that we don't question anymore. There's a lovely saying by a guy called Will Durant: we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence isn't a skill, it's a habit. But we are. Anything we repeatedly do becomes habitual. Unfortunately, once it becomes habitual, we no longer question why we do it. We just do it automatically. And that includes...
Which is a feature. It's not a bug. It's designed so that we don't have to be thinking about everything we do.
That means you can unconsciously just keep selecting pizzas and burgers and Kentucky Fried Chicken as your food options. And so hypnotherapy is really good at breaking that habit. And I tend not to use aversion therapy. I don't think it works. So aversion therapy would be chicken is disgusting. It's greasy. It's fat. You hate it. It stinks of poo. You can go for direct suggestions. You stop eating Kentucky Fried Chicken. You stop eating burgers. You stop eating this. Or you can use what we call indirect suggestion. I wonder when you'll stop eating those things. I don't know. Maybe it'll be today. Maybe it'll be tomorrow. All I know is that when you do decide to stop, you're going to feel really good about it. So there's direct, you stop now. And there's indirect, I don't know when you stop, but when you stop, you're going to feel great. And quite often you just use a mixture of the two and you weave them in and out of each other. And a few sessions of that is enough to start that healthy eating habit. And I emphasize the word start, because healthy eating then becomes a habit. So hypnotherapy starts, but you maintain that process. And then eventually, with repeatedly choosing healthy eating options, that becomes your new habit. It becomes your default. It becomes the thing you don't question. So every time you sit down with the menu in front of you, you automatically go, oh, salad, please.
Yeah. I've seen some really interesting hypnotic suggestions. So, for example, around eating or around smoking, I've seen hypnotic suggestions which take the tone of something like, your body is defenseless and you must take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you should take care of your body by choosing the correct foods or by not poisoning it with cigarettes.
Yes.
And things along those lines. Are those suggestions you've ever encountered or that you use?
I've seen them. I don't like those either. Your body is your friend.
Okay.
It's not your enemy. Body isn't defensive. Defenseless. Your body has defenses. It has, but you want to be in line with those defenses. You want to be allied to those defenses. So you go, okay, you're going to stop smoking. You are, and your body's going to love you for stop smoking. Believe it or not, your body never liked that smoke. It didn't. You think it does, but it doesn't. And it's going to be so happy that you've now chosen not to smoke. So you work with your body and your mind. Not you must do this to do that. Your body is defensive. No, it's got great defenses. It wants you on board. Get on board. Go on.
Have you ever found how does hypnotherapy or REBT, how do they interact with someone who's had a significant trauma in their lives? Do you find they're particularly effective, or maybe that some other intervention is warranted? Does having a trauma affect sort of someone's outcomes in either of those?
So no, the willingness to change or not is what affects the outcome. EMDR has become the de facto treatment for trauma, but it doesn't mean that other treatments can't work or be just as effective. So REBT is good for trauma. Hypnotherapy is excellent for trauma. What you're trying to do is reprocess the memory. Trauma is the memory is still replaying. It shouldn't be replaying. It's buried at the back of the library of your mind, but it isn't. It's at the front. It's like a book. You keep getting out, reading it. So you reprocess that memory, you file it away correctly. You know it's there, but you no longer take it off the shelf.
For people who don't know, EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. When I was thinking about it when you were talking about the eye movements and hypnosis, do you think there's any correlation at all? Maybe you don't think there is. Do you think there's any correlation at all between how those EMDR and hypnotherapy work?
I don't know enough about EMDR myself to talk about the correlation between. The eye movement patterns that they use in EMDR are particularly structured to do a certain thing. Eye movement patterns in hypnotherapy, well, first of all, you're either just trying to tire eyes out, or you're talking about REM movements because they're in a deep trance. I mean, it doesn't mean not reprocessing. They are.
Do you think there's space to cultivate a particular, or maybe it's already happened, but to cultivate a particular form of hypnotherapy that could be specifically for people who have had trauma?
Yeah, you can even, there are even courses that teach you how to use EMDR and hypnotherapy together. So short answer to that one is yes. At the end of the day, every single therapy is trying to do the same thing. They just use it with a different perspective, a different philosophy, a different modality. But the whole idea of every single therapy is borne out by a very famous quote. So famous, I can't even remember who originated it. But the whole idea is that when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Yeah, and you change.
And you change, yes. And to me, that's the essence of any therapy. It doesn't matter whether it's REBT, CBT, hypnotherapy, EMDR, person-centered counseling. It's the idea that if you can change the way you're looking at that thing, the thing you're looking at, and you change.
Mm-hmm. And even psychedelics seem to be working by the same basic mechanism of that opening up and changing our thinking patterns from more rigid to more flexible.
Absolutely. And I don't, psychedelic therapy for me can't come fast enough.
Oh yeah.
Just the things we could have achieved if they hadn't been, banned, illegal. They're only just now starting to open up to the possibilities of therapy with psilocybin, with LSD, with ketamine, and they produce wonderful, prolonged results.
Mm-hmm. And you're in Bristol, where I believe Dr. Ben Sessa is researching it.
Absolutely. We've got an Awaken Life Sciences clinic here, using, I think, predominantly ketamine-based therapy, but not exclusively ketamine-based therapy. And I think predominantly, but not exclusively, for addictions.
Yeah. I think it's really, it's really exciting, and certainly it's one of the cutting edges that are being developed in psychiatry and mental health in general.
Absolutely. For my on my list next was CPD's psychedelic integration work, because I lots of people are, because it's still illegal and as a study it's in its infancy. Lots of people are making up their own mind and doing things themselves. And although it's still illegal, you can't do that as a therapist. What you can do is take somebody who said, look, I did this massive trip, I've been given all this information, I really don't know what to do with it, please help. You can do the integration work.
Yeah, you can help them to integrate the stuff they learned on that experience into their own lives, so it can lead to meaningful change.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think, as a psychotherapist, what do you think has surprised you the most about human nature as you've come to learn about human nature?
Just how resilient we really are. You get particularly harrowing stories nearly every day of your life. But, life itself is incredibly challenging. We tend to think that life is more challenging now than it ever was. But life has always been horrible. Life has always been challenging. And we are incredibly resilient. And therapy is just empowering people, really, just to remember how resilient and marvelous they actually are.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on. Daniel, thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
You're welcome.
Where can people find you, learn more about your work?
There's my website, danielfryer.com. I practice in Bristol, but also online. So I see people nationwide and all around Europe. I've got one book out already, The Forethought. So I've got another book on hypnotherapy coming out in May. I also blog regularly on Psychology Today underneath a column called Keeping an Even Keel. I blog on my own website regularly as well. I'm not as regular as I used to, but I'm trying to get better at that one.
Excellent. I'll put a link to your website in the description. The 4 thoughts that fuck you up. Go read it. Stop getting fucked up by your thoughts. And I'm looking forward to your new book as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening this week. If you've got any feedback, as always, do get in touch. If you enjoyed the episode, why not give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, because it really helps other people to find us. If you want to get in touch, you can find us on Instagram or Twitter, or you can drop us an email. And if you value the show more generally, why not buy us a coffee? Thanks so much.